Hey, this is former Blue Devil lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
All right, welcome back in Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. We're still knee-deep in season previews, and this one I am very, very excited about, not only because I think the team is really interesting, but I love our guest, Will Qualkinbush, friend of the show, 105.5 The Roar down in Clemson. Qualk, welcome back. It's been about a year. You were here for the season preview last year, but it's been a while. How are you? How are things? I know you're a new dad, so congratulations on that.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I'm a big fan of the show. Love what you and Joey do, and I'm excited to do a little one-on-one with you today. And I am a new dad, which means this football season is going to be a little different, and this off season has looked quite a bit different too. So I'm excited to do that. And you know what? It does strike me that I've been pretty poor at preseason predictions for Clemson the last couple years. I don't know exactly what I said, but I'm sure I was a little north of the old win total. So this year we're try to nail it down. We'll see what happens.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think you said 10 wins last year, and they ended up 9-4. Okay, I'll give you a pass on that. I don't think that was too wild. I don't think that was too crazy of a prediction. Garrett Riley coming in as the OC, fresh off of a national championship appearance at TCU. I don't think that was too crazy. I think it's fine. We are recording, I need to say this at the top of the podcast, I keep forgetting. We are recording on July 29th, so I'm not sure when this is going to be released yet because we are recording so many of them. But if some major news happens as fall camp begins this week, if some major news happens, big injury, after July 29th, don't blame us, okay? Don't blame us for not talking about it. We're not dumb. It's not like we're out of the loop. I just got to put that out there right before we begin this conversation, Qualk. All right, so I think we're good. We've level set. It's early. We're pre-fall camp as we record this, and we're off. I'm going to start with the question that, before we hit record, I already talked to you about this. I know you're sick of answering this. Dabo refuses to use the transfer portal, and I'm going crazy. He is a two-time national champion head coach. He obviously knows what he's doing. He's obviously still recruiting at a high level. He's still bringing in plenty of talent, enough talent to certainly win this conference this year, I think. They're one of, the 2 or 3 favorites to win the ACC. They have a really strong team returning. They got, veterans across the board. They have Matt Luke, which we'll talk about, coming in as an offensive line coach, which I think is a great coaching staff addition. You have Garrett Riley as your OC with past success. And the type of talent that you can attract as Clemson in the transfer portal, I understand that, Dabo's saying, okay, well, I want to have, it's such a sense of culture, right? I want to bring in the right guys for Clemson. I want to make sure we maintain our identity. I understand that to a degree, but also the thing I struggle with, Qualk, and I'm interested to hear your thought on this, is that the type of guys that Clemson would attract out of the transfer portal, if they would take some of these guys, are likely some of the same guys Dabo went out and recruited, right, out the high school ranks. These 4- and 5-star guys that maybe just didn't fit in where they were at, and they come in, and maybe it's not a culture thing. Maybe it's just like, oh, there were a ton of really talented guys at other really strong programs in front of them. They didn't see the field yet, but they could still make an impact at a place like Clemson that has a national championship pedigree. So what is it that is keeping Dabo from taking on transfers? Because I feel like he's handicapping himself and capping out Clemson at like a 9-10 win level, when this is like a national championship standard that he's set for himself because he's a good coach and because he's a great coach and all that he's done in the past. I feel like he's just not adapting in a way that we've seen other coaches do in this new era.
All right, so I'm going to give you the big picture, like 50,000 foot response, and then we'll get down to the nitty gritty of this team in this season. Let me start with this. Dabo, and people disagree with Dabo. I think people have been burned by megachurch pastors and self-serving evangelists long enough that I just think people are inherently Hugh Freeze. People are inherently skeptical of somebody who claims values and is successful, and you think there's some skeleton. And first of all, there's skeletons in everybody's closet, but there's some skeleton in the closet that they don't want us to know about, and maybe we're threatened by them, and so we assume like, oh, well, he's standing by standards that I'm not willing to stand by. You're not better than me,
Right.
so there's got to be something wrong with you.
Right.
And what I would tell those people, and look, a lot of them just so happen to be Georgia fans, whose head coach right now is very good at the football part, but his players keep getting arrested and people keep getting killed in his program.
Yep.
And the median player in his program doesn't graduate.
Right.
So, like, it's interesting how many of those people who think Dabo's a phony are actually really trying to self-medicate, so to speak, because their coach doesn't give a crap about anything except winning ball games. And that's
Right.
fine. Let's just call a spade here.
Yeah.
Dabo legitimately believes what he says. He's not stubborn for no reason. He's stubborn for a reason. His portal stance is just like a lot of his stances and the way he structures his recruiting calendar, or has in the past, and the way he has built his entire program. He actually said this to me. I had a conversation with him about this very topic in the off season, sort of off the record, but
Right.
this part of it I can bring on the record for you. He says, and this is like program wide, we are not going to do things like Ohio State. We are not going to do things like Texas. We are not going to do things like Alabama. Now, that doesn't mean that nothing in the program is like those places, because we know that Dabo built out a support staff. He was the second one to really do it, like
Right.
Nick Saban did. He looked at Nick Saban and said, we need about 60 more bodies in here. And he started getting a lot of analysts, and obviously that's now in vogue across the country. But he basically is operating under the premise that if we get into a financial game with Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, you name it, all the schools in the Big Ten and a lot of the schools in the SEC, if they
Yep.
decide to, they can tap into significantly larger alumni bases. Now, I will tell you this is very much in the weeds, but one of the things that the president of Clemson has said, Jim Clements, that he wants to do is he wants to be up to 30,000 students by 2030, like undergrad. I think it's undergrad, maybe undergrad and grad.
Right. Yep.
When I was at Clemson a decade ago, undergrad and grad was like 22,000.
Yeah.
So you're talking about going up against alumni bases where the alumni and the boosters are now, funding a lot of the transfer activity and funding a lot of the acquisitions, even in recruiting. Ohio State's got 60,000 students.
Yeah.
Michigan's got 60,000 students. Georgia and Alabama and Texas have significantly larger alumni base. Oklahoma, Florida, like the state schools are going to have more alumni who are willing to give. A lot of them also are in metro areas where you have access to bigger, maybe non-donor, non-booster businesses that you can connect your players to.
Right.
So I say all that to say it's not for no reason that Dabo has been really stingy about the portal, and he's basically said we're not going to get into bidding wars.
Right.
Now we know, and this is what I say now. Dabo's not going to use the portal unless he's willing to get into a bidding war.
Yeah.
And I think he will have to at some point, especially with the new roster restrictions that came down just a few days ago.
Yeah.
I say restrictions, it's 20 more roster
Expanding.
spots.
Yeah. Yep.
And you can fund 20 more scholarships. Well, you're going to have much more turnover there, and you're still going to need to be able to tell recruits, we fund X number of scholarships. You can't just say, well, I don't like those rules, so I'm not funding any extra scholarships.
Yeah.
Because then somebody, Ohio State's going to go, well, we're funding 105. Clemson doesn't care about 20% of their roster because they're only funding 85 scholarships or whatever. Like
Right.
you're going to have to figure out an answer for that. So there is a legitimate reason why he's been hesitant to do this. Do I think that he should and could wade into the waters of the portal, really just so that, like, I selfishly don't have to answer this question anymore? Yeah, I mean, sure. But let's look at what is true about Clemson and it's not true about other programs. And I'm even talking about other programs like, for instance, Georgia. I read Kirby Smart there. I actually think Kirby Smart has a really good process about the portal. He is not going to overpay his own players. I would
Right.
argue that Dabo is willing to overpay his own players
Yeah.
and invest in them, as
Agree.
opposed to Kirby's model, which is basically, we know your value here. If you want more money than that, you can go try to get that somewhere else. And they did have a couple of good players, like the defender that went to Kentucky. They're probably not going to miss those guys, but like those are starters.
Right.
So they're gonna go other places. They're gonna get however much money that they can get. Meanwhile, Kirby's gonna go get somebody that's worth what he's willing to pay or what that other player wanted. He's gonna go get a better player, and he's fine with a bidding war for a handful of guys. You get Trevor Etienne, you're fine with a bidding war. You get some of the receivers that he's gotten, you're fine with a bidding war. And look what it got him. Kirby Smart basically has an offense returning with 11 starters.
Yeah.
Because you have ETN coming in from Florida, who was essentially a starter at Florida, even though he wasn't at Georgia. So like it works. That process works. Dabo's basically saying this: we've not lost good enough players to have to replace them with somebody else's players. In other words, you look at who entered the portal for Clemson this past year. Fairly negligible pieces. I'm not talking about recruited clay, but like
Right.
Toriano Pride. No offense to Toriano Pride. Toriano Pride was ready to play at corner as a freshman, and then he was like 6th or 7th on the depth chart as a sophomore.
Yeah.
Because other guys got better and healthy, and because he got out-recruited. So
Yep.
he goes to Missouri. You're not replacing a starter, even though he did start some games and he has played some snaps. Andrew Makuba is the big one. I know for a fact, based on conversations with people in and around the program, that Andrew Makuba was going to go to the NFL until he got a poor draft grade and he decided to go get paid. I mean, his whole thing was, I'm going to stay 3 years and then I'm going to get paid in the NFL. Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure he's got a degree, so they let him go. Well, the fact of the matter is the best stock position on the team other than defensive tackle is safety.
Yeah.
Makuba may not have started every game this year to begin with. So, like, he looks like a pretty good piece, and he's going to be a very good piece of the defense at Texas, but he was not an irreplaceable piece at Clemson. And it's not like they didn't have guys who had started at safety, Khalil Barnes, R.J. Mickens, Sherrod Koval. Like, I'm missing some guys. But Tyler Venables is coming back from injury, who started a bunch of games. So, you look, they don't lose contributors. They don't lose starters. Schools that lose contributors and starters have to go to the portal. Some schools that don't choose to go to the portal, Dabo is choosing not to. That's the stance that he's taken into this year. Now, as I said, would I like to get maybe a grad transfer or somebody that's a little better recruited clay on the offensive line for Matt Luke in his first year? Yes, they tried. It didn't work for reasons that were in their control, I think, and a couple of them reasons outside of their control. They had one kid who was coming on a visit who got in a car wreck, couldn't make the visit, and then commits somewhere else because he keeps his schedule elsewhere. I mean, that kid might not have
What do you do?
What are you going to do?
Right.
Would I like to see a little bit more maybe at defensive end instead of moving Peter Woods out there? Perhaps. But it's not like they have a ton of roster spots to fill. Furthermore, I will say this. One reason that I'm taking the stance that I'm taking is that, and my co-host and I talk about this all the time, Ben Milstead, he's a little bit older than me, but we have a very similar mind about a lot of things related to Clemson. For about 10 years, Clemson hit on everything. They hit on evaluation. Their 5 stars were 5 stars. Their 4 stars were 5 stars. Their 3 stars were 5 stars, and Hunter Renfrow came. Everybody hit, okay? And the ones that didn't matter because you were hitting on the next guy. And you hit on the guy before that, and so it wasn't a big deal. And then you had generational quarterbacks. You had a really good staff that was sticking together. You had the best defensive coordinator in the game. And so you're able to get to 4 national championship games and win 2 of them. Then you've got injuries that are striking like crazy right now.
Yep.
You've got quarterback that you missed on once. And if you're looking for a 5-star, Cade Klubnik's not it. Now, there are a lot of people that say Cade is, not a finished product, but he's taking a step. We'll see. We'll see if he gets that like second year as a starter or third year in the program type of bump this year. But I think it's clear DJ Uyunglele is not a 5-star. Florida State's going to find that out. Oregon State found it out. Clemson found it out. So you've missed several times on quarterback, several cycles now. And then you've missed that wide receiver. I think the development was not great at the defensive line, particularly defensive end. You've got a much better staff than you did 3 years ago on the defensive line with Chris Rump and Nick Eason. There are lots of positions, I think, that either injury or misevaluation hurt you. What the portal does, Mike, is it allows you to gloss over those misses. In other words, if Kirby Smart misses, if Ryan Day misses, if Chris Kleiman at Kansas State misses, they can go to the portal and they can fix it. What Dabo's doing right now is if he misses on a guy, he's missing for 3, 4, sometimes 5 years and trying to figure it out, bang a head against the wall. Is that a noble stance? I think so. I think most college football fans would say that's the purity of the game. That's great. But the reality is you don't get paid to be pure. You get paid to win games.
Yeah.
And so, bottom line, I think that's where they really handicap themselves is they really have to hone in on recruiting, evaluation, and recruiting development. And I think they have invested in assistant coaches that are probably a little more capable of doing that. And I will say this, Dabo says the last 3 recruiting classes, I don't like Cage recruiting class got a couple. The last 2 recruiting classes, including this incoming freshman class, has the look. I watched the freshman class take the field. That's a Christian Wilkins recruiting class. That's a Deshaun Watson recruiting class. That's a Sammy Watkins recruiting class. Those are recruiting classes that had the look. This group of second-year players has the look. I think this freshman class will too. Maybe they're going to get back to being a little bit better. Post-COVID, we get further away from COVID.
Right.
That really, I think, hurt Clemson more than other programs. Maybe this will correct itself. But with the roster situation and everything else, I just think this is probably the last time we'll talk about Clemson not going to the portal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to have to be. The couple things there. So, like, the real interesting part of this, right, is that, you know, when other schools miss with an evaluation, right, even the schools that are very good at evaluating talent. I mean, you look at, we'll just use the Georgia example again, right, because you brought it up. When Kirby misses, which isn't often, but when he misses somewhere, he goes to the portal and he just grabs a guy and figures it out. Like, they go and get ETN. That's huge, right? And it's not that they missed on anybody at running back. It's just that they had a need there, and they just went out and got it. Clemson, like, Dabo's got the pull, like, in the sport, right? He's got the pull to go out and get legitimately whoever he wants. I get the financial aspect of it. You're paying for rosters now. I think you make a lot of good points about school enrollment and stuff like that. It's not talked about enough, and I do think it's an important part of things now, especially as we move into this era where you are paying for the talent on your roster and you're paying more for the support staff than you ever have in the past. We're moving into a much different era in that regard. But the second point, right, so I think you can portal in, you know, where you've missed or where you're deficient. And that's something that, you know, Dabo hasn't been willing to do. And now, like you said, it's taking multiple years to replace that talent, because it's not just recruiting, it's recruiting and then developing guys to be at the level that you need them to be for that area that you missed on your roster, right? So it's a multiple year fix, like you mentioned. The second part is, and I think the answer probably lies somewhere in the middle here, but how much do you think Clemson's recent swoon, which it's relative, but they went from a national championship program to a top like 10 to 12 program in the sport, right? Holistically. How much of that do you think has to do with the fact that, hey, they're not using the portal like other schools are, versus, like you said, and like Joey has actually brought up several times on this podcast, what if Dabo just ran into like revolutionary all-time talent at multiple really important positions to nail Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence back-to-back like that, and have that 6-year run essentially where you knew what you had at quarterback, to then go into DJU, who is not obviously a 5-star talent like he was coming out of high school, Klubnik, who doesn't look that way either, and kind of to your points, like, can he improve third year on the roster, second year as a starter? Can he make that jump? Yeah, maybe he can make a jump, but he kind of is who he is at this point until we see something different. How much of it is that, and, you know, maybe not having the run of, oh my God, we got Sammy Watkins and DeAndre Hopkins and Mike Williams and Hunter Renfrow and on and on and on, where you nailed every single receiver? How much of it is, okay, we recruited some good players, but they maybe just didn't live up to the billing, versus we're not using the portal? And how much of that do you think is on Dabo's staff, just from a roster turnover standpoint, a coaching staff turnover standpoint, where, all right, like, we also lost some really good coaches along the way. Does that have anything to do with the fact that maybe the development of some of these 4- and 5-star guys that we've continued to get on the recruiting trail haven't panned out in the way that they have in the past when we were winning national titles?
It's a great question. I think there's a little bit of all of that. I always point out, though, that, you know, people who say, well, Dabo can't win without Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence, they went to the College Football Playoff with Kelly Bryant.
Yeah.
And, I mean, they got smoked by Alabama in that game. Well, I say smoked. I mean, they basically gave up 17 points. The defense did. They gave up a defensive touchdown. But Kelly Bryant still has the school record for most ranked wins in a season.
Yeah.
He went to Louisville and destroyed a Lamar Jackson team. Like, they went to Virginia Tech and destroyed Virginia Tech and Blacksburg.
Yep.
They were ranked. So, like, that season, I think, just sort of eliminates that argument. I would also point out, some of this is self-fulfilling. Like, for instance, right now, people are complaining about Clemson's offensive line. Okay, Clemson's offensive line is not as great. Well, they're not complaining about Clemson's defensive line. And I was thinking about this the other day. Clemson's have really good defensive linemen for like 20 years.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, you can put whoever coaching, but the reality is you can go back to, like, the late Gaines Adams. Was a first-round, top 5 draft pick, playing 8-man football in a tiny little part of South Carolina, okay? Gets drafted I think he was drafted 3rd overall or something by the Buffalo Bills.
Yep.
Like, you've had Daquan Bowers and Ricky Sapp were 5-stars from the same freaking high school in little tiny Bamberg, South Carolina, okay? Like, I mean, those guys were 5-stars. Bowers was a second-round pick. I think Ricky Sapp stayed around the league a little bit and still doing some stuff. Bottom line, Clemson's been really good on the defensive line, and they're going to be good because they've always been good on the defensive line. They're not as good on the offensive line because they've not been as good on the offensive line. And those are things that opposing recruiters will hit them on.
Yeah.
I would point out that, Clemson was better at evaluating and getting guys when they were a little more geographically inclined to stay close. Look at where the busts were, okay? Look at the states where they came from. I always say, like, I have the flyover theory of recruiting, that if you fly past players to get to another player, that player better be good. I won't say who, but there was a coach that I worked with one time, and in a sport on Clemson campus. This is a number of years ago, okay? So it's nobody that's currently here. But I always used to joke that the worst player in a recruiting class was going to be the furthest away. And we would have a joke, like, you could have gone literally to any high school and gotten a player as good as the one that was furthest away. Could have gone to Costa Rica to get a player, and it'd be the worst. Could have gone to California, would have been the worst. The reality is Joseph Ngata was a bust at receiver.
Right.
DJ was a bust at quarterback. I mean, that's a little bit of a strong word. DJ wasn't as good at quarterback because other positions weren't as good. I just talked about Toriano Prize from Missouri. Like, you can go to freaking Westlake High School and get somebody. Mike Reed's good at doing it. You can go to Westlake High School in Atlanta, get their best corner, Nate Wiggins, for example, and just roll those guys through on a conveyor belt. Like, you don't need to go recruit nationally. And I think what happened around the 2019 class is you started getting guys that came to Clemson for different reasons. The guys were coming to Clemson before they won a couple national championships.
Right.
This is no disrespect to Brian Brzee, who dealt with all kinds of injuries. It is a little disrespect to Miles Murphy, who was a first-round draft pick, that no one at Clemson will remember what he looks like.
Right.
Totally unremarkable player, made zero impact whatsoever. I was of the opinion, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Take that money. Congratulations. You're not even close to the standard of a Clemson defensive lineman. I'm glad you got a bunch of tackles for loss and sacks against Wofford and the Citadel, okay? Like, those were guys that came to Clemson with a 3-and-out program and really didn't care about the other stuff, and then COVID sort of exasperated that. So what have they done recently? Yeah, they'll go to New York and get an offensive lineman, or they'll go somewhere else. But the reality is they're recruiting Alabama, Atlanta, South Carolina, North Carolina, D.C. a little bit, like Tidewater, Virginia, and Tennessee. Those and Florida. You're going to go down to Florida and recruit as well. And then you've also got a pipeline in Texas. That's the one pipeline that opened up recently that has borne some fruit. Bryant Westco's from Texas. TJ Moore's from Tampa. Those are two good pipelines to have at receiver, for example, where you're replenishing the cupboard. So I think it's all of that stuff. And then the final point that I'll make here, Mike, is that Dabo Swinney was a promote from within guy, and he really wanted to be a promote from within guy. I'm sure we talked about this on the podcast before.
Yep. And
what I think happened is, like, they're like, Thomas Austin is a friend of mine. Like, I've known Thomas for a long time, since right at the end of his playing career, so like more than a decade. And like, I love his wife. Like, they're great people. I think guys like Thomas Austin were done wrong. With Mansky Hall, who just left as a defensive ends coach, were done wrong because there was too much inexperience on the coaching staff at one time. So he had a transition plan, I believe, for every position, an internal transition plan if it came to it. They lost a lot of guys when Tony Elliott got a job, when Jeff Scott got a job, when Terry Bowden got the UL Monroe job, which people don't realize, and when Brent Venables got a job. And the whole time, Dabo Swinney really wanted to promote from within. The bottom line is, when you promote too much from within, when you don't have enough like clout guys, then you end up getting out recruited. You end up with that negative recruiting thing. You end up, from a scouting and development standpoint, you don't have the track record, so we're not sure about that. It just felt like too many new people, not too much change, but too many new pieces and too many young and inexperienced pieces at one time. I think all of those guys could end up being significantly better coaches, but they needed more experience on the staff. Look at the recent hires. Garrett Riley, not from around here. Nick Eason was, but he was a pro. He coached in the pros and coached at Auburn. That guy was a freaking stud. Chris Rumpf came back from the pros after he was on Dabo's, or he was actually on Tommy Bowden's staff, but he was on Dabo's original staff and left to go join Alabama after the 2010 season. And then Matt Luke, who retired from great offensive line coaching jobs in the SEC, including at Georgia, and as a former head coach, who basically said Clemson's the only place I would come back for.
Yeah.
These are national guys. These are big clout guys that don't just have the Dabo stigma or the Dabo fingerprints on them, and don't just have the Clemson fingerprints on them. Those are guys that have their own track record when they come in the door. I think that helps a lot of what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and that's something that we brought up with you on the podcast in the past. And in terms of, okay, Dabo is promoting from within, is he doing that too much? And then the transfer portal stuff started percolating as well. But then, we saw him go out and get Garrett Riley, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, okay, this is a positive change, we think. Now, year one didn't go as well, and I had some questions about Dabo saying, oh, yeah, we're mixing Garrett Riley stuff with Clemson stuff. Well, Clemson stuff the last couple of years wasn't really working, which is why you brought Garrett Riley in. So maybe just let Garrett Riley run Garrett Riley stuff. You know what I mean? That was just like a weird quote he had that it didn't really sit well with me, and I didn't really understand what he meant by that. It's almost like, and I'm not sure he meant it this way, but it came off as I'm micromanaging a little bit with the offense, which from my standpoint, I'm thinking you shouldn't be micromanaging the offense. You brought him in for a reason, and it's because the offense was underperforming.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'll address it in two ways. First one is you got to know Dabo. When you know Dabo, he's really easy to figure out.
Yeah.
He's not going to see ground to Garrett Riley with his words, because when Garrett Riley leaves, he's going to need to project confidence.
Right.
He's already sort of trying to do that. We brought in Garrett Riley to run a good offense, and we had one with Chad Morris, and we had one with Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott, and then when Tony was by himself, and then with Brandon Streeter, and it just keeps going. The fact of the matter is, this is Garrett Riley's offense. I'll give you one important point that came up when we were talking to Garrett Riley a couple weeks ago. Dabo does a great thing where I wish he did it more, but once a year we get to go to the facility and we get an interview with every assistant coach on our radio station, flagship station. We get 2 hours. And we get to sit down. We're doing it in bulk, so it's 3 at a time, 2 at a time, and then you switch offense, defense. The media gets to meet with them, and we get to get them. So we get a lot of opportunity to ask some good questions. And we kind of were probing Garrett Riley on the quarterback run game, because Cade Klubnik, that was one thing that in the common conversation last year, Cade Klubnik was considered a better runner than DJ Uyunglele. Now, DJ was sort of a battering ram kind of a guy, but he also could get dinged like that, and Cade's really athletic. So you're going, okay, this is more of a Deshaun Watson run game. He had 150 yards rushing. I mean, he didn't do anything running the ball. He took some bad sacks. And so we're asking Garrett Riley, okay, quarterback run game. What's that like? And then I asked him a follow-up question after he gave his first answer, and he was like, I said, does, the presence of a year older Christopher Vezina and Trent Pierman, who was the star of the spring game as a preferred walk-on, 2-time Gatorade Player of the Year in the state. Dad is on the support staff. Do those guys give you more of a license to take some risks on the?
Hey guys, producer Scott here. We had a little problem with this little section here with Will, so we're going to jump into an ad read from Joey, and then we'll get back to where we picked up on the podcast. All right, thanks.
Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They've got t-shirts, they've got sweatshirts, they've got hoodies, they've got a short sleeve coach hoodie if you want to look like Coach Key. They've got onesies for babies. They've got all things for any man, woman, children, something for the whole family, all the Georgia Tech fans in your life. They need something from section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. You can go get t-shirts supporting NIL efforts with guys like Haynes King and Zach Pyron. They've got shirts supporting the basketball team, the baseball team, the volleyball team, all sorts of wonderful Tech traditions, all sorts of things. Again, any Georgia Tech fan in your life, they need something from section103.com. Once again, use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. I particularly love the Feliz Bobby Dodd sweatshirts. We got Christmas season coming up before you know it. You're going to want one of those for your holiday party. Go get it all at section103.com. Huge shout out to Steven and the gang. Thank you so much to them for their support of the Basketball Conference podcast. We would love it if you guys would go show your support for section103.com as well. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah, so, I mean, it'll be really interesting to see I think everybody's eager to see how the offense is going to look, with second year with Riley and how things are trending. It does seem like it's trending in a little bit different direction, at least from a off-season talking standpoint. I mean, so we'll see if things improve and head in a direction where, okay, well, this is like a Garrett Riley offense that we've all kind of come to expect. But I think a lot of it starts with quarterback play with Cade Klubnik and what Clemson does return on offense. So I guess let's start there. Like, do you expect, and I know we've touched on it briefly, but do you expect that year 2 as a starter jump, or do you think this is kind of like Cade is who he is? Maybe it's a little bit lower scoring offense. Can you supplement it with better defense this year and try to squeak out maybe some of those closer losses you had a year ago?
I think he's going to be better. You know what? I think a lot of it doesn't have anything to do with him. In fact, if you listen to the coaches talk about it, and even if you listen to Cade talk about it, a lot of it has to do with the availability of receivers.
Yeah.
Coming into the year last year, I mean, I remember talking to Garrett Riley last year, and his answers were basically, I don't know and we'll see. Because he didn't have available receivers. He didn't know what his passing game was going to look like. And if he didn't know, then that means Cade didn't know. They had 10 scholarship receivers, and almost all of them were healthy through the spring. Right. Tyler Brown missed some time, but he's been around this summer, and I don't think that'll be an issue. Antonio Williams is back. My coach made the point the other day. He's a freshman All-American. Clemson has 2 freshman All-Americans in their receiving core. And if Antonio Williams was a freshman All-American this past season, we would be talking more about that. Adam Randall is healthy. Troy Stellato had his first spring. He's been on campus 100 years, never had a spring, never had an August camp. Yeah. He's always been hurt. He finally had his first spring to be able to get reps. And then you've got the young guys who have come in. The 2 names that we've heard most prominently this offseason from offense, defense, everybody, Antonio Williams, number 1, took a big-time step in terms of his leadership and sort of redoubling his efforts to change his body and to stay healthy. I think missing a bunch of time last year, ended up having to take a red shirt, was not fun for him. And the other one is Bryant Wesco, who's a receiver from Texas. He's a little bit slender, but he's a freaking playmaker. And then Williams and Brown, the last 2 freshman All-Americans, both had something interesting in common. They both came in the summer.
Right.
And TJ Moore came in the summer and has immediately, Tyler Grisham told us, the wide receivers coach, that he's watched more film than anybody else. And he's bugging him. Like he said, I'm out with my wife for our anniversary, and he's bugging me trying to meet and trying to go over film. And so, you're hearing really good stuff about that.
Yep.
And then you've got Phil Maffa, who is also taking a jump from a leadership perspective. He's the guy. He's not in a timeshare anymore with Will Shipley.
Right.
He's the guy. You've got 8 returning starters on the offensive line, or I should say 8 returners who have started a game on the offensive line that are returning. And that doesn't count Ryan Linthicum, who's going to be the starting center. I think as long as Georgia doesn't break this offense like it did the 2021 version, I think this offense is going to be fine. And let me speak to that real quick, because I've been thinking about this, and in particular, talked to Kay last week at ACC Kickoff. And one of the things that struck me is his level of humility. Like, he played last year like a puppy, running around like crazy, doing dumb stuff, peeing on the carpet, whatever. Eventually, he's going to do a couple tricks that you like, but, man, there's a lot of messes and a lot of stuff to work out there. He seems like a much more grounded guy. And back in 2021, when Clemson really – I think it broke DJ. I don't think DJ ever recovered from the Georgia game. Justin Ross, I don't think ever recovered. Clemson's offensive line never recovered.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, Clemson is still sort of recovering from a Georgia game, by the way, where the defense gave up 3 points to a
Yeah, the
JT
defense
Daniels
played great. Yeah.
I mean, like, and people forget, like, Stetson Bennett wasn't the quarterback in that game. So if Stetson
Yep.
plays, maybe it's different. But it was a pick six, if I remember right. Pick six was
Yep.
the only touchdown in that game. I think this offense across the board is a much more humble group. Like, think about what the 2021 offense was coming in. You thinking that your crap don't stink, right? I mean, you've been to 6 straight playoffs. You changed quarterbacks twice and went back to the playoff every time. You won a national championship with the last time you made a transition. Like, what can go wrong? Receiver,
Right.
who cares? Just roll them off the conveyor belt.
Yep.
Older offensive line, who cares? Doesn't matter. We do the, like, move somebody to center. Doesn't matter. Running back, doesn't matter. Like, all that stuff doesn't matter. And then you show up at Georgia and you get your teeth kicked in.
Mm-hmm.
Then it starts to matter. This group is more humble. I don't think they're going to come in high and mighty like that 2021 group did. It's going to be much more of a lunch pail group, much more of a resilient group, I think, outside of quarterback. And then the question is, like you said, can Cade Klubnik be resilient in his own right? Can he be a little more of a consistent presence, not just vocally, but like just standing in there, taking a lick, delivering the ball on time? Like those are things he's got to get better at this year.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, unfortunately for the defense, right? You know, defense has lost talent year over year, and then you're asking them to all of a sudden like do too much and compensate for an offense that you're used to just, you know, like you said, roll the receivers off a conveyor belt, and you have just 5-star quarterbacks playing like 5 stars. Then all of a sudden, that stuff stops happening, right? You stop getting the play that you've gotten out of quarterback for like that 5 or 6 year run, and then you stop rolling the receivers out there like first round picks year over year. And when that stuff starts happening, then all of a sudden, okay, we need our defense to be even more excellent than it's been. And by the way, we just lost the best defensive coordinator in the sport in Brent Venables, who goes to be the head coach at Oklahoma. So now we got a new defensive coordinator, and we're asking the defense to do more and excel more than they ever have before, because now the offense is, a bit more deficient than it used to be. That's just a lot of pressure to put on defense that, look, the defense returns a bunch of talent. I think it's going to be a very good unit once again. But I feel like for Clemson to get to like that 10-win mark where they want to be to try to win the ACC, I feel like the offense is going to have to complement the defense that will be, I think, pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, starting in September last year, I took some slings and arrows from a lot of our audience when I called out the defense. When the offense was turning the ball over, and like NC State, you give up a defensive touchdown, and generally the offense was poor in those games. But what I said was, Davo kept talking about winning the turnover margin, and everybody was saying, well, Cade's got to stop turning the ball over.
Right.
All right, fair. That's fine. But he's not, though. And you got 4 and 5 stars on the defense that weren't taking the ball away.
Right.
They forced like 9 turnovers in their first 7 games or whatever. In their first 8 games, 12 in their first 8 games. I think his FBS opponents, they were averaging at that time like 1 turnover or Power 5, like 1 turnover forced a game. That's not good enough. Like if you're looking at an offense that's substandard, the way they
are what they are,
substandard, then you have to figure it out. It's like it's like a baseball team. Like, and I'm going to date the podcast here, but I watched my Cincinnati Reds yesterday. Hunter Green takes a no-hitter into the 5th inning.
Yep.
The offense has scored 1 run in 2 days, but I'm upset because the bullpen gave up a strikeout, wild pitch run, and a bases-loaded walk. You know why? Because I know the offense stinks, and I've been watching them for weeks.
You know the commodity, right?
Yes. I mean, like at some point, you have to win a 1-0 game.
Yeah.
You have to do it. You've been given the opportunity. You've got better pitchers than you have position players right now. So go win a game 1-0. I understand It's not a fair standard. I get that.
Yep.
But at some point, you got to win games that way. And Clemson's defense, to its credit, in November and then in a bowl game against Kentucky where they forced 4 turnovers in the 4th quarter, they started winning these games.
Yeah.
And they put the offense in a position where in that Kentucky game, they were able to get the ball, drive down, and win the game themselves because the defense turned the tide. I think we're going to need to see some of that at the beginning of the year, and the younger players on the defense are the guys that are going to make that happen.
I agree. It's not a fair stance, but I think if you have the known commodity and they are what they are, and I think we're going to know pretty quickly, has the offense improved or hasn't it? Because it's a lot of the same personnel. It's the same OC. It's the same quarterback. Like, if Cade's about the same, like, this offense is going to be about the same. He's so important to everything they do. Obviously, he plays the most important position on the offense. but he's so important. I mean, you brought up the quarterback run game earlier. Like, he's so important to everything that they do. Like, we're going to know pretty quickly if this offense improves or not. And it's a lot on Cade Klubnik, but hey, that's why you're a 5-star quarterback playing at Clemson, right? I mean, it's a lot on you, right? And it's year 3, you know, you're coming into your 3rd year with the program, 2nd year as a starter. Like, it's time to start delivering like you're a 5-star quarterback. And if you don't, then you kind of are what you are, which is the point I brought up earlier. And I say all that to get into the schedule now. Like, okay, Georgia, obviously not a gimme. You go into the opener as an underdog. Neutral site, we call it a neutral site in Atlanta. I mean, Clemson, we know Clemson's proximity to Atlanta, but I mean that's a road environment.
That's a home game for Georgia.
That's a home game for Georgia. I mean, that's a road environment. And you look at kind of who Clemson has drawn in the ACC. Okay, cool. You get NC State at home following an early bye in September, right? You get NC State at home. That's probably a good thing. We'll see what NC State is with Grayson McCall. I'm not 1,000% sold that all of a sudden they're just going to be. I mean, a lot of people are high on NC State. I think they have a good team returning. I don't know how Grayson McCall is going to be. We're still like a couple years. We're a couple years removed from like him being at his best. I know he's had injuries and stuff like that. But you get NC State at home. You have to go to Florida State. You got to go to Virginia Tech. You host Louisville. Like, you're more talented, I think, than 2 of those 3 teams. And you know, the Florida State thing. Florida State's lost a ton, but they have a pretty good team coming back, and obviously the intrigue with DJ. But this is a schedule that I think is workable. But I also look at this as, hey, like Clemson went 8-4 last year against a schedule that I thought was workable, and if this offense doesn't take a step forward, can I see them going 8-4 again? Yeah, I think it's within the realm of possibility, and maybe that's what has to wake Dabo up in terms of the transfer portal.
I could see 8-4, certainly. I think a lot of fans would tell you like 11-1 or 10-2.
Yeah.
Because, you know, as much as you're talking about Florida State, Virginia Tech, Louisville, NC State, Clemson is still better than those teams.
Right.
Clemson still has more continuity than those teams. They got more coming back than those teams do. Now all of those teams, all those teams present problems, right? I mean, you know, NC State's beaten Clemson twice in a row in its building, but it has not cracked the nut of beating Clemson in Death Valley,
right?
Including a couple years ago where Devin Leary was supposed to do it, and Clemson basically ran them out of the building. Like, they didn't put up 40 points, but that game was not close at all, and Leary was spooked from the get-go.
Yep.
I have my doubts about that. I still. Like, Louisville was a fine team last year. I think we've missed it on Louisville. I think we said before the year, if Louisville gets to Charlotte, it'll be because of schedule. And then they got to Charlotte, and we tried to retcon back and make believe that Louisville was a good team. No, like, we said that it wasn't because they were a good team.
We knew.
We said it was because of schedule. And, like, look, I'm not saying they're bad, but I'm saying not at that level. So are they going to come in with Tyler Shuck? I like Jeff Brom, but I don't love Tyler Shuck all that much, even though he's 28, you know.
It's never healthy, yeah.
Right. I don't know that they're going to come into Death Valley. The 2 games that I'm most concerned about are those road games, Florida State and Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, to me, is an interesting piece because of drones and his ability to make plays. I think Clemson's defense is very good against mobile quarterbacks. They've gotten a lot better in the last couple of years. Like, last year, they really limited the mobility for the most part. Like, there were a couple pop plays, but like Haynes King, Drake May, like they faced Sam Hartman, like they faced some guys who could run a little bit, and they didn't really run a lot on Clemson. So particularly the guys returning were a big part of that. And then at Florida State, you know, Clemson's done a good job in Tallahassee. In fact, they're the last team to beat Florida State in Tallahassee. Florida State is on an unbeaten streak that started the week after. DJ went in there with a little flea flicker pass in the 3rd quarter, basically turned the lights out with 5 minutes into the 3rd quarter. And then Florida State came back and made it close at the end. But that game was, quickly over, relatively speaking, the last time Clemson went in there. And one thing that I'm curious about Florida State, this may not matter at all, but this is a team that's very much under reconstruction, shall we say. They lost a lot. They are talented, as you said. Their stadium is also under construction. They're seating 55,000 in their stadium this year.
Yep.
I'm curious what kind of home field advantage Florida State has relative to previous years with large sections of their stadium unavailable, and especially if their team is, you know, I don't think it's a given they go across the pond and beat Georgia Tech. Then they got to come back. I agree. And if Bill O'Brien's not over Thomas Castellanos by then, they got to face the quarterback that made them look worse than any player outside of Georgia's offense
Right.
last year in Thomas Castellanos.
Right.
I think they should be very concerned about the first two games. Again, I'm not saying they're going to lose them both, but I'm saying they have a tricky schedule. Bottom line, you're right. Clemson has a tricky schedule, but I think on an individual level, I'm not as concerned about those games. What I will be concerned about is the compounding effect of injuries should they strike again the way that they did last year at receiver and on the offensive line. And then if Cade Klubnik is a deer in the headlights on the road, I think those are questions that I have about Clemson generally with this schedule that, as you said, it's last year I think probably was a little tougher once we got into it than we thought on paper. This one on paper looks pretty tough, especially relative to what some of the rest of the contenders in the league have to deal with.
I agree. The Virginia Tech point, I think Virginia Tech probably has a roster that's a little bit better than what Louisville had going into last year, but I also think that Virginia Tech is going to be a lot like Louisville in that I think they have a chance to win 8, 9, 10 games, but is that really a proponent of them being like a 9 or 10 win game team, or is this more of schedule? I mean, I think a lot of it's schedule. They miss a lot of the top teams not named Clemson in the ACC. They don't draw them this year, and I think that's a big reason why Virginia Tech's win total is high, and they have a chance to make some noise in the ACC. I think it would be very similar to Louisville, where I think Virginia Tech will be good. I think if they get themselves into an ACC title game, I think they're going to be an underdog, I think. And I think a lot of the reason why is because they're simply not going to be as talented as the team they're playing. And that's fine. They got good they have good talent across the board with their starters, but they have depth issues where an injury or two at a couple of key spots, and all of a sudden we're talking about a team that maybe is not quite as good. I bring that up because I agree with you. I think the Florida State and Virginia Tech games on the road are the two tough ones. NC State at home, I think it's a tough game, but I think that's one that Clemson can win because, like you said, NC State has had trouble going into Death Valley and actually winning that game. So regardless of what we think of NC State, obviously that's going to be a game that we're going to keep an eye on. Georgia, I'm writing off as a loss in the opener just because I think Georgia's, I think, at that elite level, right, where Clemson once was. And I think Clemson's a step down. I just worry about Klubnik against that defense. I just don't know how that's going to work. Now, if Clemson goes into that game, bona fide road environment, and he puts on a good showing, but Clemson loses, right? And all of a sudden, Klubnik looks like he's taking a step forward. That could be a victory in of itself, right? Early season non-con loss. You went out and challenged yourself. You lose semi-close, and Klubnik looks good. I think a lot of Clemson fans right now would sign up for that. Maybe I'm wrong about that, Qualk, and you deal with the radio callers. I think a lot of Clemson fans would sign up for that, and I look at the rest of his schedule. I think so. I said I could see it being 8-4. I think this is like a 9-3, 10-2 type Clemson team because I think the rest of the ACC, not named Florida State, has taken a step back, and Florida State's even taken a step back. But I think Florida State's still got a lot of talent. Miami's talented, but they're Miami, so we'll believe it when we see it. I don't think like the next slew of contenders for the ACC, the NC States, Virginia Techs of the world, I don't think they're as talented as Clemson. I don't think they are. So I think Clemson's got the talent. Can they play to the level that they need to is the question I have. And I think that could be a 9-3, 10-2 type record where you're in the conference title game with a chance to go to the playoff.
Yeah, I mean, to your point about the Georgia game, it's been 10 years since Clemson could get a moral victory in a game, which is bizarre that you played 10 years without a moral victory being on the table.
Right.
The coaches and players will say the right stuff, and fans will try to copy that. But everybody knows you don't have to beat Georgia. You just have to give confidence you could beat the other 11 teams on the schedule. I would suggest to you that Georgia actually is going to be more of a test for Clemson's defense. I said earlier, Georgia's basically got 11 returning starters on offense.
Yeah, they're going to be
And then defensively, I know they lose draft picks every year, but they have lost a lot of draftable talent and leadership from the last two groups.
Yep.
I think this defense is actually, like, Clemson could benefit from a lot of people thinking that this is a classic Georgia defense, when in reality it might be a little more gettable than some of the recent versions. And so if Clemson just plays reasonably well and people have overestimated Georgia's defense even by a hair, then you're taking a lot of good vibes into what I think is going to be a tough come down at home against Appalachian State, who is very used to being a giant killer. I think a lot of Clemson fans are kind of nervous about that. And a lot of observers are going to end up being nervous about that. That will be a popular upset pick, or at least, take the points with App State type pick I agree with you. I don't know where they lose another game, but I'm done picking Clemson to roll through all the games where they're favored.
Yeah.
I say they drop one to the schedule. I mean, maybe they split the Florida State Virginia Tech games. I'm still going to pick Clemson to win all its home games. The last 2 years, they've lost home games. One to South Carolina where they had the ball 4 times down one and couldn't seal the deal. I don't know what in the world that was. And then Florida State beat them in overtime. Clemson doesn't lose. They don't lose them. And it took some fluky stuff. I mean, they're going into score before the scoop and score on Mappa's whiff and the sack on Klubnik there late in the game. They're going to be up 2 possessions, and they probably win that game against Florida State, a team that was undefeated. So they're going to win their home games. I'm not worried about that until they start, like, getting beat at home rather than losing. Until they start getting beat at home, then I'll start worrying about that. But I say 10-2, and if you're 7-1 in the league, you're probably going to Charlotte.
Agree.
I said this too, like at ACC kickoff, I think Clemson was a team that people kept coming back to. I didn't hear from a single media member that didn't have Clemson going to Charlotte, because it's like driving your car to the dealership and looking at all the cars on the lot, and they've all got problems with it. And you're going, well, if I'm going to pay money for a car with problems, I'll just drive the car I've got with problems.
Right.
And that for a lot of people is still Clemson based on the last decade.
Yeah, I agree. That's where I'm at. It's okay. Well, if not Clemson, then who? And then I got to rely on a team that's just not as talented, right? So I got to pick an NC State. I got to pick a Virginia Tech. Like, good teams on paper, but I got to pick them to win the league. I gotta pick. The one team that's the wild card is Miami, because I think Miami's got the talent. If they actually figure it out with Cam Ward at quarterback, okay, then maybe that's the team that keeps Clemson out of Charlotte. If Clemson drops that Florida State game, for example, okay, maybe Miami's the team that keeps Clemson out of Charlotte. But I'm with you. It's you're kind of grasping at straws if you get out of the upper echelon of talent in the league, and Clemson still got that, regardless of everything we said about the transfer portal. They still got some of the top talent in the ACC for sure. So that's where I'm at too. I think your 10-2 prediction, totally fair. I'm gonna go 9-3. I think it's slightly better than last year. I think we still leave the season asking kind of similar questions about direction of the program, just because we know what it once was. And I think we get a little bit closer to what we know Clemson to be, but maybe not quite all the way back there. So I think that's where we're at. Qualk, appreciate it, man. I want to give you a chance to plug your stuff. Thanks for coming on, as always.
At Qualk Talk on Twitter. I'm on noon to 3 daily, Monday to Friday on 105.5 The Roar. We have an app, theroarfm.com, and of course the app in the App Store. You can download, listen live every day. We have 13 hours of live programming every day, local, which is amazing. And then I do lots of work for the Clemson Athletic Network on the radio side, pregame, halftime, postgame, football, women's basketball, baseball, and then do some ACC Network extra stuff too. Soccer's coming up. I got a handful of soccer games, and I'll be doing some maybe a couple men's basketballs in the winter, and then a lot of baseball and softball in the spring. So fun time, man. Looking forward to a good season. I appreciate you having me, Mike.
Yeah, staying busy, buddy. Staying busy. We'll definitely have you back on. Clemson will be a team to monitor this year for all the reasons we know, and we'll see how it shakes out now as we get further and further removed from their last national championship. So appreciate you having you on and you coming on the podcast as always. We'll be back, more previews. We're rolling through them here late July, early August. We got a ton of teams still left to preview. We have now officially, at the time of this recording, have now gotten through 3 season previews, so we got certainly more to come. So stay tuned to the feed and all the places where you can find us. But we'll talk again soon. Until then, go ACC.